Suicide Note, by Mitchell Heisman. This work is a computer-generated reading of Suicide Note, by Mitchell Heisman. This reading was produced using Natural Reader 14, a product of Natural Soft Limited. This work is free and licensed by Mitchell Heisman for copying and distribution under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivative Works 3.0 United States license. Part 1. God is Technology. How the singularity of monotheism transcended biology and primed the technological genesis of God. All ideas are not created equal. Ode to Capitalism. Thus, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely, the production of the higher animals, directly follows. Charles Darwin, The Origin of Species. It's the economic imperative of a competitive marketplace that is the primary force driving technology forward and fueling the law of accelerating returns. In turn, the law of accelerating returns is transforming economic relationships. Economic imperative is the equivalent of survival in biological evolution. Ray Kurzweil, The Singularity is Near. Imagine that someone knew nothing about the Jews except that they were the ancient people that originated the biblical foundations for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Such a person might surmise that Jews are the most spiritual people on earth. Since many people contrast spiritual with material, that person might also presume that Jews must be the least materialistic people on earth. It just so happens, though, that God's chosen people have gotten themselves a reputation for being the most materialistic people on the planet. Is it an accident that this people with inordinate spiritual claims is simultaneously the people with inordinate material gains? This divine irony makes a great deal of worldly sense, however, when we grasp the historical significance of capitalism as the engine driving technological evolution towards the first ultra-intelligent machine, the last invention that man need ever make. The apparent paradox of Jewish materialism and Jewish spiritualism is resolved in the material creation of the spiritual machinery of God-level artificial intelligence. The Jewish invention of monotheism appears to be directly related to a characteristically Jewish proclivity for observing and predicting large-scale, international, economic trends. If capitalism is a generator of God, a means of economic technological evolution that will eventually produce an artificial intelligence of God potential, then biblical monotheism may be, in part, the product of the most radical possible extrapolation of such trends made near the dawn of international trade. Precisely because such developments in the ancient Near East would have been both so rupturously new, relative to common, conservative assumptions, and so uncomplicated by the subsequent chaos of cumulative cultural evolution, these early economic civilizational trends would have been more clear in their original, primal simplicity. Jewish international trade networks, for example, can be seen as evolutionary precursors to the international connections that are the Internet, and the global brain of the Internet, in turn, can be seen as the evolutionary precursor to the global mind of God. With this evolutionary connection between money and God, one can reevaluate Werner Sombert's The Jews and Modern Capitalism. Catalyzed by Max Weber's The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, this early 20th century German economist believed that the dominating ideas of Puritanism which were so powerful in capitalism were more perfectly developed in Judaism. While Sombert's account of Jewish influence on the development of international capitalism seems exaggerated, his work is notable for his recognition of the Anglo-Jewish convergence and the religious roots of the Jewish proclivity towards capitalism. In Sombert's view, the rationalization of life, and especially of the sexual life, which the Jewish religion affects cannot be too highly estimated for its influence on economic activities. If religion is at all to be accounted a factor in Jewish economic life, then certainly the rationalization of conduct is its best expression. The Enlightenment prejudice that religion is synonymous with the irrational is unscientific, and especially unable to explain the role of the Judaism in Jewish survival over 3,000 years. Consider that Mosaic law originated in the work of a socio-biological engineer, an evolutionary step towards rational social engineering that accepts both the irrationality of human nature, and moderate rational corrections of human nature. If so, then one can appreciate how the economic rationalism of capitalism might emerge as a logical extension of the Mosaic method. Cheshbon Hanifesh, for example, is a Jewish accounting of the soul that combines self-reckoning with the aim of self-criticism and self-improvement. It is the application of an accountant's mentality to morality so that consciousness of deficits on one's moral balance sheet will stimulate higher moral yields in the future. What in reality is the idea of making profit? What is economic rationalism? Asks Sombart, but the application to economic activities of the rules by which the Jewish religion shaped Jewish life. From the perspective of the 3 to 4 billion years of life's evolution on Earth, rationalization of the instincts could be considered subversive. From the view of the selfish gene, natural, instinctive, phenotypical expressions of genes are denied the rank of the highest authority. If Mosaic laws outrank the authority of gene-rooted instincts, and these laws are identified with the higher authority of God, then the higher authority of God is identical with dethroning of the supremacy of the genes. In the Jewish religion, observed Sombart, it is just the strongest instincts of man that must be curbed, directed into right channels, deprived of their natural force and made to serve useful ends. In short, they must be rationalized. By curbing the instinctual and subjective instincts of internal experience, Judaism opened greater space for perception of external experience. Opening greater space for the external, objective, material world opened greater space for the worldly goals of capitalism. Instincts that once served the propagation of selfish genes were diverted from naturalistic expression and domesticated, channeled, and redirected towards God, i.e. the post-biological evolutionary processes of capitalism. Taken to its theoretical extreme, instincts towards biological reproduction would be channeled into economic reproduction. The instincts that served biological evolution alone for millions of years were reordered towards the service of economic technological evolution. The fundamental alternative to the rational subordination of biology-based naturalism is embodied in political movements such as Nazism. Sombart ultimately embraced this alternative in joining the Nazi Party. Judaism is an attempt to lead Jews to an ideal of civilization over Kultur that culminates in the ideal of the total rational overcoming of the genes, God. The Nazis, by contrast, followed Nietzsche in rejecting the biblical roots of the Enlightenment's own project of pacifying, harnessing, and rationalizing the most powerful raw energies of the human animal. Whereas Darwinian naturalism emphasizes the commonality between human and non-human animals, monotheism emphasizes the separation between human and non-human animals, i.e. Judaism's outlawing of totemism and animal worship. The Nazi emphasis on the unity of the human and the natural had more in common with the paganism of the ancient Greeks and Romans, than with the modern, biblically influenced separation of the human realm and the natural realm. The contrast between biblical and Greek views was illustrated by the medieval Jewish philosopher Maimonides in a commentary on Aristotle. According to him, there is no difference between the fall of the leaf and the fall of the stone, on the one hand, or the drowning of the excellent and superior men that were on board the ship, on the other. Similarly, he does not differentiate between an ox that defecates upon a host of ants so that they die, or a building whose foundation are shaken upon all the people at their prayers who are found in it so that they die. And there is no difference, according to him, between a cat coming across a mouse and devouring it or a spider devouring a fly, on the one hand, or a ravenous lion meeting a prophet and devouring him, on the other. The idea that humans are privileged above nature underlies the modern premise of human rights. It is the idea that each human life should be valued as a political constant, and not as a political variable. It is undergirded by the assumption that conscience should put brakes on a complete abandonment of human beings to the vicissitudes of the natural world, i.e. natural selection. The original idea of human rights was built upon an assumption of mind/body dualism, a double standard between humanity and the larger natural or physical world. The Jewish or Puritan rationalization of instinct that is conducive to capitalism illustrates how the original biblical separation of the human from nature can be understood in a way that is fully compatible with recognition of biological evolution by natural selection. The Jewish Bible capitalizes on the distinctly human ability to master animal instincts, and this tends to produce a dualistic worldview wherein instinct is devalued as evil and overcoming instinct is valued as good. One can fully accept Darwin's discovery while also recognizing why the Bible emphasizes divorce from the animal or biological nature of humans, and a cultivation of the moral and intellectual capacities characteristic of capitalism. The total separation of the human from nature, in material terms, would be the autonomy of technology separated from dependence on biology. The biblically inspired, modern rule of so-called equality is actually the assertion of certain kind of superiority. The rule of law is actually an assertion of being above the law. Egalitarianism assumes human superiority over biological nature, and the rule of law assumes rule over and above socio-biological law. These modern ideas are analogous to, and inspired by, generalized biblical principles of God's law reigning over and above man's law. The biblically rooted, modern idea of equal human rights thus look very different in light of the entirety of Earth's biological evolutionary history. The logic of compassion for all living things points all the way down the evolutionary ladder. The elimination of selection ultimately universalizes towards mammal rights, animal rights, plant rights, and ultimately, towards death and the non-biological, physical world. Reaching down towards the most extreme evolutionary implications of the idea of equality in equality with the non-biological, physical world, one approaches a Gödelian-like paradox. From one point of view, the egalitarian logic of the elimination of selection leads, in theory, to the decomposition of biology into dead, non-biological matter. From another point of view, the capitalist path that raises egalitarian progress towards the pinnacle of a moral value hierarchy leads, in practice, to a parallel progress of economic technological, ectech, development. So while biological evolution declines, capitalist ectech evolution accelerates. The pinnacle of the paradox is the egalitarian equivalence of biological matter and non-biological metamatter, wherein the nadir of biological evolution is equivalent to the pinnacle of technological evolution. The pinnacle of humanly developed technological evolution is the God potential of artificial intelligence. The nadir of human biological evolution is death through total elimination of selection unto the equality of biological and non-biological matter. And this equality of biological and non-biological matter is simultaneously a basis for equivalating biological matter and non-biological matter as information, i.e. uploading one's mind into a computer. In other words, there are at least two ways of interpreting the extreme implication of equality as the equality of biological and non-biological matter. In one interpretation, the equality of biological and non-biological matter is death. In another interpretation, the equality of biological and non-biological matter is the very foundation of post-biological life, i.e. gradually replacing biological organs with non-biological organs and thus becoming a cyborg. From a strictly biological view, then, egalitarianism appears to lead to an evolutionary dead end. Equality leads to the unraveling of biological evolution towards the equality of biology and the larger physical world that biology emerged. But here we encounter a paradox wherein the very lowest evolutionary implications of equality can be turned upside down into the very highest evolutionary implications of equality. While the equality of biology and physics leads to biological death from a literal point of view, the equality of biology and physics can lead to a higher form of life from another point of view. The higher meaning of the equality of biology and physics is the transfer of biological patterns to its informational equivalents in a higher form of physical material, technology. An example would be mind uploading, scanning the biological brain and uploading a faithful reproduction of its informational contents into a digital computer. The equality here is the information equality between the biological brain and the equal reproduction of its informational content in digital form. Equality, in this context, thus refers to the transfer of biology into a different, but informationally equivalent, physical form. It is equality in the sense of an equivalent or equal representational mapping of biology onto information technology. This trade or exchange of genetic information into non-genetic information is a form of economization. Modern egalitarianism can be viewed as a symptom of a larger process of economization. While in its common use, economics refers to trade, money, supply and demand, etc., economization is a far larger phenomenon that ultimately amounts to the translation of biology into technology. First, foremost, and fundamentally, a decisive turn to economization began with monotheistic ethics. The Jewish economic mentality, most famous, or infamous, in its monetary expression, is only a development of the fundamental economization that begins with monotheism, the economy of good and evil. The economy of good and evil most specifically refers to the biblical economization of the political good with an anti-political good so that human politics are deprived of pretensions of net superiority. Biblical ethics take traditional socio-biological hierarchies and economizes them. The Christian kingdom of God economized the kingdom of Caesar. The classic Jewish equivalent would be the Egyptian pyramid hierarchy turned upside down so that Hebrew slaves ranked on top. If one looks at the Egyptian socio-biological hierarchy as paradigmatic of evil, and the ultimate overturning of that paradigm as good, normative Judaism itself can be seen as a moderate ethical economization that moderates both of these extremes while aspiring to that ultimate goal. Liberal democracy is roughly equivalent to Judaism in the very general sense that it moderates the extremes of both biological evolution and technological evolution while setting its ultimate capitalist trajectory on the side of technological evolution. Judaism implicated this path towards technology because Judaism itself is a form of technology. The Jewish kinship paradox was the central problem of biological naturalism that the laws of Moses attempted to technologically solve. Since Jews could not synthesize themselves as a group within a purely naturalistic political socio-biological framework, extra-biological laws attempted to forge a social unity sublimated towards an extra-biological God. The Mosaic laws were technology used, not only to make up for what nature had not provided for, but as a basis for the ultimate God aspiration to technologically better biological nature altogether. The ultimate supernatural God was thus the ultimate cumulative symbol of the technological overcoming of biological nature. Judaism was built on the belief that civilization technology can overcome the socio-biological limitations of humans. To be a Jew is to enter into a belief system that changes the behavior of the believer. The strange survival of Jews over 3,000 years is living, empirical proof of the power of meta-civilization to overcome normative biological limitations. In Judaism, biological weakness was compensated with civilizational strength. Memes strengthened some genetic proclivities while counteracting other genetic proclivities. Through a complex mixture of strengthening and counteracting genetic inclinations, the laws of Judaism brought behavior towards a proscribed equilibrium or equality. If memes simply modify or counteract genes in a limited way, that is one thing, but is there an ultimate net advantage? In other words, while balancing undesired behaviors with socially desirable behaviors may achieve a net equilibrium or equality within that limited social realm, but is there a net advantage beyond that limited aim? If equality is only the expression of a compensation that makes up for certain biological deficits, it may not ultimately be the expression of a net evolutionary superiority. If the innovative path of Judaism were taken to its logical extreme, and memes totally counteracted genes in every way, it would lead to the total eclipse of genes. Analogously, the idea of equality, taken to its logical extreme, accounting for the whole history of the evolution of life on Earth, would lead to total biological self-destruction. If the present human status quo were accepted as a starting point, literal equality would mean the maintenance of this status quo as permanent. Literal equality would mean that the future human status quo must always be equal to the present human status quo. Literal equality would mean, above all, that no net advantage, no form of progress, growth, or change, no net gain is admissible. In short, the idea of equality, taken literally, is the very antithesis of the idea of progress. Total equality, projected into the future from any point in time, would mean that everything stays equal to what it is, the same as what it is. Inequality, by contrast, allows difference and change. If so, Does the modern association of equality and progress make any sense? What is really going on here is that modern equality specifically refers to biological equality, while its association with progress most specifically refers to non-biological change, progress, development, and inequality. Human equality is not only sustainable, but also productive, in its liberal democratic form, precisely because it does not hold non-biological inequality to the same standards as biological equality. The moderate and limited elimination of selection on a political level is not applied on an economic level. The selective and discriminatory way of thinking about material order that makes for capitalist success is formally denied and practically moderated in politics. Karl Marx was understandably obsessed with this central contradiction of capitalist liberal democracy, formal human equality and capitalist inequality. He failed to appreciate, however, that what Hitler called the Jewish invention of conscience gradually constructs the triumph of technology over biology. The egalitarian elimination of selection acts as a counter-development to socio-biological development. A limited elimination of selection in politics brings biological evolution to, not a standstill, but a minimization, and this allows economic technological evolution free rein for maximization. The economic rationality of selfish individualism overrides the biological rationality of the selfish gene. Economic relationships are allowed to overcome genetic or kin-selective relationships. The potential energy stored in socio-biological hierarchy is released as the kinetic energy of capitalist individualism. The supremacy of the economic breaks down the socio-biological order and builds up the ectech order. As capitalist imperatives drive the ruling structures of human order, the actual content of human civilization gradually becomes less biological and more technological. Part biological and part technological, human society very literally becomes a socio-biological cyborg. In the process of overcoming human being, individual humans themselves will likely become cyborgs. At the very heart of this transition from man to machine is the individual. By failing to grasp the full implications of Darwin, one of the most central, foundational errors of Marxism was created, the dismissal of the modern human right to life as merely the expression of bourgeois class interests. Mass individualism is what brings the biological human race to its end because it implies that every individual is fundamentally separate from every other individual, and capitalist competition on this basis ultimately leads to competing one another out of biological existence. Put another way, modernity is characterized by the rise of individual self-interest that gradually displaces the selfish gene's interests in propagating itself into the next generation. The full self-realization of the socio-biological discontinuity represented by universal discontinuity between individuals is a finality when genes stop being propagated into the next generation altogether. One overlooked meaning of modern equality, from this view, is the transfer of biological means of production to non-biological, economic means of production. Biological evolutionary development is exchanged for its equivalence in economic, non-biological evolution. Machine reproduction gradually outcompetes human biological reproduction as single-minded focus on individualistic capitalist victory coincides with demographic decline in the most economically developed countries. From a strictly biological view, this form of self-development is the path of self-destruction. The fulfillment of the logic of equality leads to biological self-subversion, self-inversion, and self-negation. Self-destruction is a final logic of this economy of life and death. Yet the logic of the equality of life and death from a strictly biological view is the very foundation of greater life from a post-biological view. As conventional subjectivity is overtaken by scientific technological objectivity, self-rationalization culminates in biological self-destruction as genes are analyzed and transferred into information as memes. Such rational self-destruction, then, is the translation of genetic interest into memic interest through acts of strategic genetic self-negation. Put another way, the morality of God's construction is fulfilled through biological self-destruction. It is no accident that Jewish ethics implicate the elimination of selection and the end of biological evolution. It is also no accident that the Jewish association with capitalism implicates the rise of economic technological evolution that culminates in a greater than human artificial intelligence. These two inverse and opposite trends are corollaries of one another. Biological evolution is devalued while economic technological evolution is maximized. When these two inverse trends are grasped simultaneously, one can see the Jewish invention of monotheism was a momentous evolutionary step away from biological evolution, and towards the last and greatest achievement that the biological human race is capable of, the invention of God AI. Jewish ethics devalue biological evolution while Jewish capitalism drives the technological evolution of God. The full realization of the technological paradigm is built upon the overthrow of the biological paradigm. The Exodus paradigm is built upon the full inversion of the Egyptian pyramid hierarchy paradigm. God is built upon a victorious Agon with the gods. Equality brings biological evolution to an end so that technological evolution can begin. The culmination of the paradigm shift is the singularity, the creation of a greater than human intelligence, the beginning of God. This revolution is what Karl Marx failed to grasp when he seized upon the inherent inegalitarian of the capitalist process and the capitalist mind. His On the Jewish Question was quite explicit in its identification of Jews and the capitalist mentality. What is the secular basis of Judaism? Practical need, self-interest. What is the worldly religion of the Jew? Huckstering. What is his worldly God? Money. What does money have to do with God? Capitalism is how to create God by getting rich. Capitalism is the means of evolving God. But what happens as this end approaches? What happens when the competitive clashes of capitalism squeeze more and more of the higher capabilities of humans into automated machines? What happens when robots displacing humans on an unprecedented scale cause an unemployment crisis on an unprecedented scale? Though Marx was wrong, and his entire way of conceptualizing the ultimate logic of capitalist development must be overcome in light of evidence that he did not or could not account for, there is some rational basis for the association of secularization and the names of Jesus and Marx. If the advance of robotics and AI gradually puts most, and eventually all humans out of work, then only some form of socialism could remedy the social crisis produced by the advent of AI. In failing to predict the advent of artificial intelligence, Marx failed to accurately grasp the ultimate nature of capitalism. On one hand, capitalist competition produces AI robotics that makes human workers obsolete. The unemployment of the human race can ultimately make biological humans equal in the sense that the capitalist basis for human socio-economic inequality has been removed. On the other hand, such biological equality among humans is possible only through radical inequality between the most advanced artificial intelligence, and the most advanced biological human intelligence. Within such a confluence of events, what is conventionally called artificial intelligence, almost inevitably appropriates the image of God. Godhood, in this scenario, would befall the most advanced artificial intelligence that has all effective control over the economy while biological humans have been outcompeted of the means of providing for their very subsistence. Total human unemployment is a formula for the most radical social revolution ever known. It can also be a formula for demonstrating how the logic of human history fulfills the biblical image of heaven on earth, God AI, with the help of robotic angels, i.e. created out of smart dust, provide for human needs out of the unprecedented abundance made possible by advanced technology. God AI trillions of times more powerful than all human intelligence combined might view Einstein and other human geniuses as akin to severely mentally retarded humans among contemporary humans. All humans would then be in a position to understand ableism, the form of discrimination that implies a technological valuation of human beings. In comparison with God AI rapidly accelerated its evolutionary advantage, humans might then descend from the intellectual status of severe mental retards to chimpanzees to bacteria to rocks. Equality leads to equality with the larger physical world. From this perspective, the possibility of giving intelligent machines the political rights of biological humans is only a flip side of a right of biological humans to upload or transfer their informational equivalent into machines. It is the right to move on from this life to the afterlife. The traditional biblical belief in the resurrection of the dead has a specific evolutionary meaning. To understand this, consider the previously mentioned case of Neanderthals that went extinct at the hands of presumably more intelligent humans. If modern notions of justice and right were applied to Neanderthals, justice would demand that these victims be compensated for the injustice of the genocide that led to their extinction. One way to compensate them would be to clone new members from surviving DNA. Another way, however, would be to simulate Neanderthals on powerful computers. While I doubt that biological humans have a future as biological beings, it is quite likely, for a variety of reasons, that biological humans will be resurrected in post-biological forms in computer simulations. Natural selection, when applied to biblical modern human standards of justice and right, is inherently unjust. Ancient prophets intuited what it would mean to vindicate the injustice of natural selection. It would take nothing less than supernatural justice. It would take nothing less than the resurrection of the dead.